Barry, thank you for joining me. Thanks for making the time.
Emma, it's great to be with you.
Tell me a little bit about your career journey because we're going to go on to talk about the 29, 30 years that you spent as a CEO and what you learned about leadership during that time. But I'm really interested in the kind of the origin bit, if you like. How did you get to that? How did you get to that bit? Tell me the story.
I ended up as a CEO for 29 years, but I didn't start out thinking that I was going to lead a company or lead an industry. I really was the kind of person who just brought people together, who was always looking to make whatever situation I was in a little bit better. And that was the way I operated, in every context, wherever I was. I just saw a problem. Hey, how can we work on this together? Let's solve it and then move on to the next thing. And in my own, you know, adult life, more or less, I, I started out as a teacher. I was a teacher for 2 years. And I will say that uh, as a result of that education as a teacher, and that experience teaching in high school, which is quite a challenge as it is,
I'm sure, yeah.
yeah, that I lived my entire life as a teacher, and it helped me in many interactions be more eager to explain things to people, not mansplain, but be patient with people. Not
Yeah.
everybody uses the same language. Not everybody has had the same experience that I've had. So if I'm working with folks and I may know a little bit more, then I try to be more patient with them to bring them along as well as listen to them and learn. So I consider myself to be a teacher because I had that solid foundation as a teacher. And as I moved along through my career, it's just, it was part of my DNA. And even when I think about my family, I didn't think about this until after I became a teacher. And I don't know why I never thought about it because it was so obvious that I have two older sisters and they both were teachers.
Ah.
So there's nobody ever said, Barry and Bonnie and Michelle, you all should be teachers. No one said
Yeah.
that. We just chose the profession separately. We all were in the profession at the same time. And and then suddenly, when I got out and moved on to graduate school, realized, oh, you know what? We were all teachers. We'll have education degrees. How about that? So it was
Something
just
in the
kind of,
DNA there.
yeah, it was weird. And and then I left teaching, and I left because of an administrative issue. That sounds kind of weird, but there was negotiations between the teachers union and the school district about salary, and they said, well, we've got to reduce the number of teachers, and they sort of give a little head fake and saying we're going to fire all the teachers that don't have tenure. And when that happened, it was sort of a negotiation ploy, not mine, but among the
Mm,
administrators.
yeah.
I decided to go back to graduate school because I didn't want to be a pawn in this game.
Yeah.
So I went to graduate school and chose a different profession. I went to school in engineering, and we would call it traditionally mechanical engineering, but from a broader perspective, I would call it energy engineering or the energy business. So, and there's a lot of ways to think about that. You can think about oil, or you can think about heating or air conditioning in your house. There's different ways, but bottom line is I was, interested in energy, and it was at a time when the, well, this was back quite a while ago in the early 1980s when there were oil embargoes in the Middle East. How about that?
Yeah.
There still
Yeah.
is.
I know.
And prices went up really high. So there was a lot of interest in energy at the time. So
Yeah.
I found a graduate program there. And then from that, started to work in the field of energy and got experience in a variety of topics. And and then from there, you know, moved up little by little And then I did one, let's see, after, let's say, at age 28. So, I had about 5 years of experience with education and then working in the energy field. My wife and I decided to move out of the United States. We wanted to live in another country before we settled down to start a family. And we had three options. One was go and live in Paris, and that was what a great
That sounds
idea
like a
that would
nice
be.
option.
Yeah. Number two, which was not overseas, but it seemed kind of different, was to live in a very rural area of the United States. It was the rural
Mhm.
part of Colorado. So again, not overseas, but a different experience. And then the third one was to join the Peace Corps, which is from the
Yeah.
US, living, out in the countryside in another country. And we had to examine each of those options simultaneously. So we were looking at Paris and Colorado and the Peace Corps. And the Peace Corps came in first. And there's kind of a rule in the Peace Corps that they're kind of a yes and group. You have to, you go along with the flow. And if you say no too much, then you're not really a good Peace Corps volunteer because life gives you a lot of lemons, so you have to make lemonade. And that's part of the Peace Corps experience. So
Yeah.
when we got the call from Peace Corps to say, would you like to go to Guatemala and live for 2 years? If we said no, that was our only shot. They wouldn't
Yeah.
say, "Oh, well, we'll give you a whole menu of
We'll give you
options."
another option. Yeah.
Right. So we said yes, and then lived for 2 years and 3 months because there was 3 months of training there, and a tremendous experience because we were after training we were plopped down in a town with um, some colleagues, not our own colleagues, I mean colleagues from Guatemala, and and then we were there to start our own program, our own business from scratch. So it gave me both the experience of being a fish out of water, so
Mhm.
just picking yourself up by your bootstraps and figuring things out, which is a phenomenal experience. Nobody's spoon feeding
Yeah.
you anything. And then two is effectively, starting your own business in another culture. I mean, to say it's a business is not quite accurate because it's, we were, our salaries were covered by the US government, our very modest salaries. But even still, we had to sort of create something that didn't exist.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of initiative that we had to show. And when I came, our families, my wife and I, our families hated this choice of ours. Hated it. They thought we were
They were hoping
making
for
a bad
Paris.
decision.
They
Right.
wanted to come
They
and
liked
visit you
Paris.
in
That's
Paris.
true.
Yeah.
Like what happened to Paris? What happened to Paris?
Yeah.
Yeah. And they made it known to us. We were
Mm.
clearly adults. We were in our late 20s and there was no control. We weren't accepting any money from them in any way. They just let us know that they thought we were doing the wrong thing. So we went we went anyway.
We went anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I came back, when we came back, the 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 job that I got that launched me on my career for the next 34 years
Mm.
was I got an interview with this company in Washington D.C. and the first person I interviewed with was another returned Peace Corps volunteer.
There you go.
So
Yeah.
what did we talk about but our Peace Corps
Yeah.
experience? And
Yeah.
he said, we got to recommend this guy. He can do anything.
Mm.
And, because that's what we talked about. We talked about,
Yeah.
how did you figure it out from having nothing? And
Yeah. Yeah.
so we clicked really well. And, I met with a few other folks, but it was clear that they needed somebody who had initiative. And,
Mm.
when it comes to the world of work, there's only so many majors in a university, And there's so many different kinds of jobs. It's impossible to be completely experienced, completely dovetail with a job when you're going into a job.
Mm.
So what's more important are your qualities, of your personality, of the things that you are capable of doing
Yeah.
and learning and growing and so on. So that's something that I was a touchstone for me. That experience of being hired because of effectively my initiative was more important than knowing anything about energy. I knew stuff about
Yeah.
energy, but it wasn't 100% of what they did. So I had to learn
Mm.
the way they did it. But I was
Yeah.
happy to learn about it because I had that
Mm.
experience. And then from there, I worked there for 5 years. And then a job opened up as the CEO of an organization that was in Florida. And I applied for it and got that job. There's another tie-in to that, and then worked there for 21 years as the CEO, and then got recruited to California because they saw me doing whatever I did in Florida, doing it well.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
and then finished my career in California, or as the young people say today, my W-2 career, because now it's a gig economy, right? So people
Yeah.
do all kinds of
Yeah.
things. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's the broad umbrella of my career and a
Very
few
cool.
big things I learned along the way.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that stand out there for me. Firstly, actually, if I got my numbers right from what you said, so you would have been about 33 when you became a CEO, 32, 33? Yeah, a little bit
Yes.
later. Yeah.
Actually 30, it was 39 when I became a
Okay.
CEO
Missed
because
a bit.
yeah,
Still a very young
because there
CEO
was
because
Peace
that was
Corps
the
and then
thing that,
5 years at
yeah,
this company. So
yeah.
so yeah, 39.
Yeah, but even then, quite young in terms of how we sort of traditionally think about that role. And I absolutely loved your point there around that first role, which then became quite pivotal for what came next. That it was actually some of your, I guess, innate talents, your behaviors, the things that you'd learnt in a non kind of traditional work setting that actually got you that job. And I think we gloss over that far too often and purely just focus on what people have done in their careers. And I think particularly for people who are earlier on in their careers, it can be quite challenging because you haven't done that much by that point. And so you do sometimes need other things to talk about or other experiences that you can bring in.
Right.
And the other thing that stood out when you were talking about your experience in the Peace Corps, even as just as you were saying it, I was thinking, wow, I can see why someone would jump at hiring someone who had done that. Like it's even, today I'd be like, if someone came forward and said, well, we moved to another country and yeah, there was a bit of infrastructure, but do you know what? We just kind of had to figure it out and we had to use our initiative and we had to problem solve. And in my head, I'm thinking like, tick, tick, tick. These are all of the things that you would want to hire in someone. You want someone who can solve problems, who can think for themselves, who can take on challenges and be resilient in that sense. So yeah, super interesting. I can see how that would be such a formative experience.
Yeah.
As you sort of reflect back over the decades in that kind of CEO leadership role, you've touched on a couple of things, particularly with the Peace Corps, in terms of things that you think made you good at what you did and made you a good CEO. Are there any other things that you sort of look back on hindsight and go, I think that was one of the key things that really perhaps, elevated me through my career or perhaps separated me from competitors? What were those things?
There's a few things. The number one is taking responsibility. And I can point to experiences that I had, like moments that I had where I raised my hand to say, I'll do that. And it led to me getting noticed and a bigger responsibility and a better job. And actually the CEO job, my first CEO job was tied to that. But going back a little earlier, was something I didn't mention in my uh, curriculum vitae, which I'll tell you about, which is when when I was when I was 10, I started playing hockey. And I was just a kid playing hockey. Like I'd also play softball and soccer and whatever. I was, an active kid. But at 16, I went to hockey camp over the summer. Yeah, so it's kind of weird. It's hot out, but I go to a cold ice rink. And one of the lessons we had was from a hockey referee who came in to tell us the rules. And like, oh, who knew there were rules? I thought it was just, put the
We're
puck
just
in the net
skating around and hitting
and
each
then
other.
and then hitting each other, right? Fighting with each other. Yeah, that was it. So apparently there's rules. And he talked to us about certain rules. And then he said at the very end, and if any of you want to get paid and be skating around on the ice and having even more fun, then talk to me when you get back to the city and we can talk about you becoming a hockey referee. And I followed up and became a referee at age 16. Actually, I was mostly a linesman. So when you think about a soccer game, or do you call it football? Football or
I'm
soccer,
English,
right?
so yeah, football.
Football.
Always
Yeah.
football. Yeah.
You have the referee who's in the middle, and then you have on either side you have the two linesmen that have the flags and call offsides and so on. And that first year, I was mostly a linesman. I refereed or officiated some of the little kids games, but I got a lot of good experience over my rookie year. And at the end of that rookie year, I was assigned a big game. It was a college level game, and I was assigned as a linesman. And when I arrived at the rink for the game, in the locker room were two other officials that I knew, and they were also linesmen. They were sort of at my level. And I said, which one of you is the referee? And they said, oh, not me, not me. And I said, well, I'll get dressed, but when the referee comes in, you guys can work the game. And nobody came. About 15 minutes before the game was going to start, the official scorekeeper came in and said, hey guys, which one of you is the referee? And I looked at the other two guys and they were like,
Like,
and I said, I am.
yeah.
And he said, good, this is a really important game. These two teams are the top two, and they're vying for the playoffs. So you've got to really call this a tight game. Watch out for the violence, and we want a good, clean game. And I said, I'll take care of it.
No problem.
And
Yeah.
I thought to myself, what did I just do? Like I said, I had refereed, I had been the main official for little kids games, but nothing like this before. And the other two guys were like, thank you, we'll support you.
Yeah.
So I put on the
From the
referee's
sidelines.
armbands.
Yeah.
Yeah, I put on the orange armbands, right. And went out there and fortunately, I was wearing a helmet so nobody could see I was a little 16-year-old, squirt. And I started the game, with all the confidence I could muster up. And about 2 minutes into the game, there was a face-off in the corner. That's where one of the linesmen drops the puck. And he dropped the puck, but just before he did, another player skated in too early and picked up the puck and started skating out on a breakaway down the ice. And I blew the whistle. And I said, number 8 was in the circle too early. Do the face off again. And half the people in the crowd were delighted that I blew the whistle. And the other half were screaming like, you crazy. But it was the right call. And then I went into the circle and I said, if you do that again, I'll throw you out. And it just like got everyone's attention. I went back to my position and I thought, I hope that went over okay. But again, I was just reacting.
Mm.
Because I had showed that assertiveness, the entire game, nobody gave me any guff or anything.
Set the
And
tone.
it went great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hardly any penalties. it was really good. And after that, people in that officiating world noticed. They realized the screw up in the scheduling of officials, but they said, "Oh, wow, Barry worked that game. That's pretty good." And then the next season, I got bigger and bigger games, and I was put in these more responsible positions, and I felt like I was being challenged quite a bit, but I had
Mm.
mentors, people who were watching me and giving me lots of feedback. And I did it again the third year. They kept giving me bigger and bigger games. I was finally doing these college games when I was 18. And then when I was 19, they nominated me to go to National Hockey League referee training camp, which I went to. So I went to this camp in Ontario, and I became a professional hockey referee.
There
Now,
you go.
as a hockey referee, I didn't go to the NHL right away. You go to the minor leagues, right? So the minor leagues are, in smaller towns and a lot of driving. And there was no internet in those days, no cell phone in those days. So I was going to college while I was working 2 or 3 games a week and driving around, and it was quite a challenge. And I was doing that for a while too. I didn't end up doing about 5 NHL games, but
Yeah.
at one point I had to make up my mind about what I was going to
Yeah.
do, whether I was going to continue to go to college or continue to try to move up in professional refereeing,
Could have been a
the
completely
latter.
different career path for you.
Completely different,
It's a
yeah.
fork in the
And
road.
yeah, and my family didn't want me to go down the professional referee career. Not that they didn't think it was a good idea, but they just said that, "What are you gonna do at age 40 when
Mm.
that's over?" And
Yeah.
there was really no good answer. I had no idea
Mm.
what I would do. And they said, it's still, that's kind of a risk to do that. You'll probably make it to the pros, by age 30, which I think I would have. I have colleagues that's about when they made it into
Yeah.
the NHL. They worked for 7 or 8 years and they were doing that.
Yeah.
But ultimately I chose this other path of teaching and working up, and I became a CEO anyway. So it worked out okay. And I think that the level of responsibility that I learned from that experience stayed with me throughout my career. And I would turn to another quick story, and that is when I was back from the Peace Corps, I was working at an organization in Washington, D.C., and we had an all hands staff meeting one day. And that meeting, it was just a regular boring staff meeting lasting about an hour. And at the end of the meeting, the the office manager who sat a couple doors down from me said, "We want to start planning for the holiday party." It was, I think, September timeframe. And she said, "We need volunteers to be on the holiday planning committee." And nobody raised their hand.
I was
And
going to
I
say
wasn't that
silence.
interested.
Yeah.
Right. I wasn't that interested in it. But she was a friend and, again, very close to me in proximity. And there was this silence for a few seconds. Nobody raised their hand. And I thought, well, I like Arsenio. So I raised my hand and I said, yes, I'll do it. And and then after I did that, 2 other people raised their hands. So we just formed the little holiday planning committee. We did our job and we planned a holiday event, which turned out great. However, it turned out that the CEO of the company loved the holiday party, loved it. And he came to all of our planning meetings and was involved in the games that we were planning, just loved every minute of it. Just, I don't know why,
Yeah.
he just loved it.
Yeah.
And right after the holiday party happened, so like I say, it was a successful event. He came into my office one day and I thought, he just like popped in and I thought, oh. I mean, literally, I thought, oh no, because he would never
Yeah.
just come into anybody's
Yeah.
office. Usually you get summoned to his office. And he said, "Barry, do you have a minute?" And I said, "Sure, yeah, yeah." He sat down and he said, "Every summer we hold a giant meeting for 2,000 people and we hire very famous speakers, and they're nationally known speakers. And when we paid them lots of money. And we get to the Q&A portion of the their presentation, and it's hard to get our 2,000 members, the first one, to ask a question. But once we get one question going, then people start stepping up to ask the question. And he said, would you come to that meeting and ask the first question? Because it seemed like you're the kind of person that takes initiative. And I don't know how he got that, but it was just one of the things that he picked up on in our little holiday planning meetings. So
Yeah.
I said, sure, I would love to do that. And of course, I had other responsibilities at the meeting besides just asking one question. Nevertheless, that was the most important thing that I do. Everybody knew that as soon as the speaker was done in Q&A, I stood up at the microphone. And I was thinking during that speaker's presentation, now what can I ask them about? And they said this and they said this. And we try to just ask a thoughtful presentation. And so I did that for 5 years. And the 2,000 people in the auditorium would know who I was. Hi, I'm
Yeah.
Barry, and
Yeah.
when a job opened up in Florida as the CEO, they called me up and they said, we need somebody like you who will stand up before our legislature and advocate for us. Can you do
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
And the reason I got that job was because they saw me doing it. So
Mm.
raising my hand as a hockey referee and raising my hand for the holiday party and then standing up before the 2,000 people and then, well, being in the audience for that,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
got me noticed. And that was the kind of initiative that they wanted to see. So
Mm.
when I point to those experiences, I can say that I still had to do the work, but
Of course.
there were these
Yeah.
moments, yeah, when I raised my
Yeah.
hand and it got me noticed.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, initiative, I was thinking 100%. But the other thing I was thinking is for 5 years in a row, standing up there in front of 2,000 people, that's an amazing level of visibility. Like, and just the reinforcement that it was you
Yeah.
every year as well. I think visibility is something I talk about a lot, but I think it's easy for people to forget what that can look like just in sort of everyday settings. Sure, it can look like having an online brand, a personal brand. Sure, that's part of it. But it can also look like being the person who puts their hand up in the meeting and always asks a really thoughtful question and does that time and time again. Like that's a level of visibility I was going to say that you can't buy, but it's just reinforcing in people's minds that there's Barry again. Oh, he's always here, and he's always the first one, and he always asks such a thoughtful question. And I think sometimes we can jump to these really grandiose ideas of what visibility can look like, but actually sometimes it's these very simple day-to-day interactions that we're having with the people that we work with, our peers, and also the people who are senior to us as well, that can actually be pivotal. And I think sometimes that can get a bit lost in translation, perhaps.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it wasn't about dominating the
No, no,
conversation. It was just
no.
about,
Mm,
trying to make things happen. There's
yeah,
another lesson that I learned, I would say sort of in between the raising of the hands, which was grit and persistence. Doing what you were talking about, which is then doing the work. If you're going to raise your hand to take
yeah,
responsibility, then it's one step in front of the other and getting the project done. And that's something that I maintained a lot. I When I got that first CEO job, my boss, the head of the organization, said to me, all those ideas that you have, Barry, and I would, throw out lots of ideas, brainstorm ideas here and there. He said, be careful what you say out loud because
yeah,
now you've got to do them
yeah.
and you want to be more cautious about them. And it
Mm,
wasn't so much as like, don't be creative. It was just, if you're going to brainstorm, say, hey, well, let's brainstorm and then
yeah.
we'll decide on something and then we'll all agree, let's go do that and try it out.
Mm,
However, if you just say, hey, let's run over here and run over here and run over here,
yeah.
that is sort of a recipe for spreading yourself too thin, but make sure that people know we're all brainstorming together, and then we'll choose something, and now let's put our initiative into that topic. So
Yeah.
having that persistence, once you've decided, is something that I think has been, a when people are ready to give up, somebody has to say, okay, we're doing good here. We're halfway done. We're three-quarters of the way done. And that's part of the job of a manager, part of a job of a leader, to go down that road.
Mm. A
You
really
know, there,
interesting observation from, sorry to interrupt you,
yeah,
just a really interesting observation from that gentleman who said, oh, be careful what you say. And
right.
it reminded me, actually, I had a sort of a picture in my mind of someone that I used to work with who was incredibly creative and would, throw out these ideas all the time. And I think because I was used to it, I would just be like, okay, yeah, maybe we could do that. And I took it in the spirit in which he said it. But then other people found it really destabilizing because they were like,
Mm,
oh, are we going off over here? I thought we were doing this thing, and now you're talking about, and they actually found it quite overwhelming.
yeah,
Um, so to your earlier point, actually, was being a teacher and understanding how different people think and how different people communicate, that point kind of ties in. If you think you're just, oh, these ideas, but unless you've kind of telegraphed them as, I am now brainstorming, these are just ideas, I'm not saying this is what we're doing, they can
right.
easily be misinterpreted by other people.
Yeah, and I had to learn to say, "Hey, I'm just brainstorming
Mm,
here. Let's
mm,
brainstorm together on this."
yeah,
Or, "I have a crazy idea. I want to hear your feedback. What's good, what's bad?" And
yeah,
oftentimes in a brainstorming exercise, one crazy idea leads to another idea, and then you say, "Oh wait, but there is a nugget of something we can do here, and we can do that one easily." And
yeah,
try it out and see how it works. It's not going to involve a significant investment, but we can get some experience with it. So maybe we can see. And that way people know, at least at the outset, like you said, it's important to let them know that we're just brainstorming right now, and there's,
yeah.
you know let's work on something together.
Yeah. And to
Yeah,
your point there about, here's my crazy idea, I'd love your feedback, like what's good about it, what's not. I think there's always that danger, particularly when you're the most senior person in the room. If it's your
right.
idea, no one wants to criticize it. They're all going to sit and go, oh, Barry, that's a great idea, when it might be
Yeah,
the worst thing they've ever heard. But just that, again, just that little half sentence before of, this might be crazy, would love your feedback, tell me what's wrong with it, tell me what's right with it, just gives people that permission to say, actually, I'm not sure that's, the direction we should be going in, or I don't think it would work for X, Y, and Z reason.
yeah, exactly. And sometimes I would pitch something and say, let's talk about the pros and the cons. And people would say, well, we could do it this way or we could do it that way. And then I would come up with some reason why it's not a great idea, just so people could feel comfortable saying something negative about it.
Yeah.
I would pitch the negative, concept first, so people could say, oh, yeah, that could go wrong. And this also could go wrong, but I just wanted people to feel comfortable
Yeah.
because they might not. Yeah.
You've got a
Um,
visitor.
Yes, yeah, I know. My dog, heard another dog walk by. Yeah.
When
Um,
when you think about the people that you worked with that were perhaps in either in your leadership team, or people that you saw within the organizations that you were leaving, that kind of were able to fast track themselves quite, I was going to say quite quickly, it doesn't necessarily have to be quickly, but what were the things that you observed in them? Were there things in addition to the things that you've already mentioned that you saw in other people, and you think, oh, that person's doing that thing really well, I can see how that's going to stand them in good stead?
yeah, I take pride in my career that I developed people under me so that they could rise in the organization as well as take over my position. To the two people that took over as CEOs when I left, both were deputies in the organization. And it wasn't by chance that that happened. I saw that they had skills, and I would tell you this, that in both cases, both of those particular cases, that's just the development of the deputy to the CEO, but there's been many others sort of along the way. I went to them and I said, I see you as a senior leader here, and I want to take you down this road. Do you want to do this?
Yeah,
And they thought about it. And I wanted to make sure that they felt the responsibility that they it's not just about more money or telling
yeah,
more people what to do. The responsibility is immense. I worked in the electric utility industry, and we managed a multi-billion-dollar portfolio. And it wasn't my money. It was, the collective organization's money. We made decisions as, I wouldn't always say as a group, but we consulted together as a group.
yeah.
And then wherever we needed to, we made decisions either, two people together or in some cases myself. But still, that was something that they had to decide, do I want that level of responsibility? And they said yes. And they had already exhibited the level of responsibility that was required. What they needed to do was to be able to make sure that they could bring it out of others. When you are, when you're in a silo and you are working in one particular part of an organization, you you sometimes want your silo to win over the other silos. And when you have a growth mindset, when we're going to learn, we're better off when we work together, then you have to be able to go to other silos and say, we want you to win too. We all win when, our entire company wins when our various silos work better together. And that was the true test, is to me, is not only wanting your department to do well, but also branching out and to wanting other departments to do well. And once somebody exhibited that behavior on their own, it wasn't, they never felt like it was a competition, but they felt like, let me give information to others. Then they were ready for that C-suite job, and sort of that giving mindset. I don't know. That's what I live for. I mean, as somebody who, I wrote a book on teamwork, and one of the
Mm,
things that I identified as a key characteristic is the ability to reach out to others and want the best in others. And
yeah.
uh, so if you've got that skill, then and those people did have that skill, then they were ready for a higher level.
Mm. I think there's such an important point, and there is a couple of things that really stood out for me there. But that initial part of, so I went to them and I asked them if they wanted to do it, because I think so often there's this kind of almost default that, well, you should want the next job, you should want the promotion, you should want to be, you should want to climb as high as you can, you should want to be the CEO. And that's not necessarily true for everyone. And as you said, there's an enormous amount of responsibility and stress and sleepless nights and, all of the things that come along with that. And that's not for everybody. And that's okay. Like it shouldn't have to be. So I love that you started that by actually saying, I asked them if they wanted to do it rather than
Right.
just assuming that they should want to and that they would want to. And also, it was just really nice to hear you talk about leadership from that perspective of, we're better together, we're stronger together. That idea, if we all win, we will get further in the long run than if we try and individually win. I think so often, maybe I shouldn't say so often, often. Again, I think that can get lost in translation. And I can imagine as a leadership team, if you're able to exhibit that, the sort of the markers you're setting for culture within the organization, that this is how we do things, that this is what leadership actually looks like, has an enormous kind of trickle down effect to everyone in the organization. And I kind of wish that more organizations operated like that. I think we might be better off if they did.
Yeah, I agree. And so much of what I did early in my career was based more on an equation. There was a process that we're following to build something or put together a computer model or whatever it might be, something physical or something related to software. And then as I grew into leadership, what I found was that the majority of the things that I did involved dealing with people, and not always people that agreed with me, and trying to bring them to my side or advocate for what we were trying to do, so that I didn't know if I would be successful with the on the people side. And and nobody ever said to me, well, this is a people job. They just
Yeah.
sort
Yeah.
of said, oh, it's sort of just management and it's just getting stuff done. Like, when you reflect on it, it's all about dealing with people. And a lot of it
Yeah.
is listening, is
Yeah.
spending the time it's just shutting up and listening to people. And what I found was one of the key ways to actually shut myself up was to, listen, like we're having a conversation here. I talk, you listen, you talk, I listen. And while I haven't used it here, it's nevertheless, I would use this constantly. And that is this: say to somebody after they've just told me something, are you saying, and then repeat back to them my interpretation of what they
Yeah.
say. And the reason why that's important is because I'm filtering their
Yeah.
words in my mind and trying to imagine what it is that they're saying. And I want them to know that I actually understand it. So we have to have this sort of meetings of the mind. The only way to do that is to ask them, is this what you mean?
Yeah.
And and that technique is, got me far,
Yeah.
because it allowed me in many situations with many individuals, sort of one on one, to connect better with them.
Mm.
And I think that asking follow up questions and seeking understanding uh, was one of the things that people found that I was sort of better at, and as a
Yeah.
result said, I'd like to work with you, that kind of a thing.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I sort of point them to that technique. It's what I
Yeah.
just described is something that you do really well, is you're listening to somebody and saying, and then you're reflecting on that, and then you're saying, that's an interesting point you made. Let's talk about this a little bit further. So that you're demonstrating what that leadership quality looks like.
And I
Good
think
job,
in
Emma.
in the thank you, gold star to me. And I think in the context of a work situation as well, as you were saying that, I was thinking, to your point about it's your perception, you're filtering the information. Yes, you're demonstrating to the person that you've heard them, but you're also checking that you've understood them correctly, so that where if there is some misunderstanding, if you have misinterpreted, or they didn't say it clearly or whatever, you can deal with it then and there, not in 3 months time when we're way down the road in a project, and we've based the whole thing on some assumption that actually wasn't correct. there's
Oh
a
wait,
there's a
you
few
meant
benefits rolled in.
that? What you
Exactly.
meant
Hang
what?
on. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. So,
Final question, Barry, and it's always the final question here, and that is, what do you know now that you wish you knew then?
that is a good question.
It is a good
Um,
question.
I would say that I wish I knew earlier in my career to take charge of my career, that no one else
Mm,
is going to be looking out for me, that
yeah.
I needed to, it's not so much decide where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do, but to continue to look for opportunities, and everything evolves. We think we want to be on this track, and then something happens, or you see something in that uh, you know, you learn a new technique, or you learn a new area from a course that you take, and you say, I'd really like to move into that area. That's okay. It's okay to do, but no one else is going to do that for you. You have to do it
Absolutely.
yourself. And no one explained that to me either. It,
Yeah.
but if I knew that earlier, I would have been, I think, more active in that space. I always had a growth mindset. I still do have a growth mindset, that I don't know everything, and that it's really important to continue to have an open mind to continue learning. So there's no question about that. But alongside that is, now, what I'm here in my career, what else could I be doing from this place? Where are my
Yeah.
interests? And
Yeah.
do I want to continue in this career, or do I want to follow a particular interest for a little while and try that?
Mm.
So, but being intentional about your career is really important. They say that we spend more time planning a vacation than we do our career.
Yeah.
I'm
I
not
can
sure if
believe
that's
that.
true, but I know that we do spend time planning vacations. We think about
I love to
where we're
spend
going to
time
go.
planning vacations. It's one of
Yeah,
my
me
favorite things
too.
to do.
Right. And we get down into all kinds of interesting details.
Yeah.
And when we think about, okay, now let's talk about your career, it's like, oh, wow, that's a big issue.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Absolutely.
it it's okay to do the same kind of brainstorming on your own career as well,
Yeah.
because again, no one else is going to do it for you.
Yeah.
So it's valuable to look at the kind of things that you're interested in, and take opportunities when they come your way, because
Mm.
no one's going to do it for you.
No, I totally agree. And I would go further actually to say, I think it's the single biggest thing you can do that will have the most impact on your career is to take ownership of it. To the phrase I often use is, I am the captain of my own ship. I am I
Yeah.
am going to be in charge of it. I'm going to advocate for myself. As you said, no one is going to do it for you. And I think so often, perhaps slightly subconsciously, or because, as you said, no one ever told me that that's how I should think about it. I think often people sort of default to, well, it's the organization's responsibility to tell me what my development path is, or it's my manager's responsibility. And like, sure, they're there to help you and support you, but it's not their responsibility. It's yours.
Right.
And I think the more people who understand that, accept that, and act accordingly, the better off they'll be, actually, in terms of where their careers go. So I
Yeah.
like your
And
answer
as
to
you,
that question.
yeah, I mean, I know what I'm about to say is going to sound like self-serving, or maybe that's not the right word, but whatever, a little, complimentary of you. Listening to podcasts, listening to my leadership journey, and finding a little tidbit of information or knowledge from every guest. You never know what you're going to find. And serendipity is so important in your life. So just continuing on with that learning mindset, that growth mindset, is going to, let a thousand flowers bloom,
Yeah,
and then lead you in a place where,
yeah,
you may find that you're happier than where you are now.
yeah. And to your point on serendipity, the other thing I think it gives you is, I think it enables you to spot opportunity. I think two people can see the same scenario, and one person can see the opportunity, and the other person can't. And I think those things are really interlinked. So as you look back and think, oh, that was, very serendipitous that the guy who interviewed me had also been to the Peace Corps. And I'm sure there's lots of instances like that through your career. There's lots in mine. But if you think about it that way, you see it as an opportunity. You see that, oh, okay, here's a door opening. I can step through that. There's X, Y, and Z on the other side. I think it changes the way that you think about things. It certainly does for me. Thank you, Barry. I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed chatting to you, and to be fair, could have talked to you for hours more. I was conscious of the time and not wanting to make the episode too long, but there's a lot more that we could have said. So thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your experience and your insights.
Thank you, Emma. It was a great conversation.